Good afternoon and welcome to our latest virtual Art in Focus. We are once again looking at an artwork that is part of our ongoing exhibition for which it stands. Those of you who tuned in to our last month when we looked at Child Hassam, this will sound very familiar to you. Here's the lovely advertising logo with all of the artists who are incorporated in this show. This exhibition is running through July in both of our spaces, Bellarmine Hall Galleries and the Walsh Gallery, and it's been organized in conjunction with the commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So it is trying to take into the sort of the full gamut of artists responding to the American flag, starting with where we began last month, Child Hassam in 1918, and going all the way up to artworks that were only finished last year in preparation for the show. We are, for this Art in Focus, we're staying in Bellarmine Hall. We're moving just a few steps away from the Child Hassam painting to a very large painting that confronts you as you enter the gallery. So the scale is quite large, and I chose to include this photograph without cropping it any further because I wanted those of you who are perhaps not able to come in person to the Bellarmine Hall galleries to really get a sense of how, especially groups of students, university students, classes that come to the gallery, the kind of experience that they have. When the Bellarmine Hall galleries were designed as the first outpost of the Fairfield University Art Museum, they specifically designed the entrance staircase to accommodate seating a full class of 25, 26 undergraduate students, like as a place to have them sit. Our galleries are pretty small. They're pretty intimate, is what a real estate agent might say. They're very cozy. So it can get pretty challenging when you have a big group and you want to move around to look at small objects that are mounted on a wall. And just by the gift of this exhibition, we happen to have this fantastic painting that is big and in your face and right across from where they can comfortably sit themselves for the 75-minute class session. So I have spent a lot of time so far this semester talking about this painting by Robert Lynn Lambdin, which traveled to us under the name Heroes of World War II. It's from 1958, oil on canvas, and we borrowed it from the Bridgeport Public Library. So Bridgeport, Connecticut, directly adjacent to Fairfield, Connecticut. This did not travel very far to us, but we're delighted to have it as part of this exhibition. And those of you who are from Connecticut and especially from the Fairfield area might recognize this artist's name. He was a Connecticut-born artist who worked for the Works Progress Administration during the 1930s, 1940s, and his murals remain in the Bridgeport Post Office, in the Westport, Connecticut Post Office. And just last year, the Fairfield Town History Museum and Cultural Center, they had done an exhibition of WPA paintings he had done for the Bridgeport Brass Company. Bridgeport was once known as a brass city as in its industrial past. So this is an artist who's has that sort of history about him in this local area where our museum happens to be. On the other hand, this is a painting about which we have some unanswered questions. You'll notice, for example, and we'll come back to this, that the title of the painting is not italicized as we normally would. Instead, it is in brackets, which usually indicates when you encounter that in a museum that you're looking at sort of a nickname that has been assigned to the artwork. For example, not a title given by the artist itself, something descriptive, something it's traveling under, and it may have the object may have different content than what you're seeing it described as. So we will come back to that. But its inclusion in the Bridgeport Public Library collections is a fairly recent addition. And when they were so kind as to lend it to us, our director who curated the show, Carrie Weber, she happened to be at the Bridgeport Library for another meeting, and she saw this painting where it was installed and thought, oh, like we should definitely borrow this for the flag show. And the information about where this painting originally came from still has a few holes in it, I would say. It's pretty obvious that it came from somewhere close to here. We were told by someone who's affiliated with the university that it came out of the headquarters of the Bridgeport Brass Company, where the artist had indeed done other paintings, but he'd done them 20 years earlier. And one thing I've pointed out to visitors who come into the gallery is that this is perhaps the only painting in the show that is not rectangular. It has this arched upper level. And that, in conjunction with its rather large scale, you see it here in relationship to some other artworks, that tells us that it was definitely painted for a specific space. As in, this artist may have been shown, here's the space we have, the shape it takes. What can you paint to fill this space? What the other details of this commission may have been, we really just don't know. We have received conflicting information on exactly who arranged for it to be donated to the Bridgeport Public Library or who had it in their custody in the period before then. So that is one of the sort of mysteries of provenance in art history that certainly for museum people, we find that like extremely interesting. Other people may not find that interesting at all, but we always want to know more. Why was this painted? In terms of what we are actually seeing, this, as I mentioned, is a great painting to talk about whether with a class full of undergraduates or we just had a very intimate art and focus in person. There were 3 participants, myself, and regulars, Pat and Joanne, and then of course our museum guard, Barb, our volunteer, Tom. So it was, it's a rainy day if you're here in Connecticut. So, we sat there, we looked at this painting, and one thing I ask people who look at it, and I'll ask you as you're looking at this virtually, I ask them to think about where their eye goes first, and maybe where your eye moves secondarily. And especially with students, I'm encouraging that as a way of getting them to think about the choices an artist has made. And something that I often remind them is like, unless you're speaking of the kind of art that was made, for example, for to only be seen by the eyes of the divine, generally speaking, art is intended to be seen by human eyes and it was designed by a fellow human. Attention to keep it, to direct it, to create some sort of mood for you. And I'll ask you as you are watching this to think about what adjective you might assign to the mood or the vibe that this painting creates for you. So it's always interesting that there's not a single focal point that everyone says they look at first. I mean, obviously there are certain things that generally either our visitors we just had in there right now or students, they will often call out, well, I look at the guys directly under the flag because they're in the center. It's sort of the oldest trick in the book by an artist, right? The thing that they want you to look at is dead center. The American flag is on axis. It's brilliantly colored and it's red, white, and blue. And then you have this tall figure in brown standing directly underneath it. You have a man in green army uniform standing a little bit further forward to his right. That makes perfect sense that that would be a place that your eye would pass first. Others have said that the first place they looked, and actually I realize I have some details, so, well, others have said that the first place they looked was at this guy, who is all the way to the left, because he is the only one who's looking at us. So that might be something that draws our eye. Here we have our 3 guys in the center. A lot of people, especially students, have immediately commented on the man in the right on this detail because he stands out. He has no shoes on. He has no shirt on. Several students have called him like, oh yeah, the guy who's kind of like emaciated, the underfed guy. I'm like, okay, I do see that his rib cage is visible, but I mean, he looks pretty healthy. But they really notice that as a difference. And some people have pointed out something that stands out to them as a marker of difference among this group. There's one woman who is present on the other side of the composition, and then there is a Black soldier all the way over to the right. So it seems that there are ways to think about this group, the commonalities that they have. Immediately, we recognize them as a group of service members. The presence of the American flag leaves no doubt in our mind that these are American servicemen and women. And then we notice distinctions between them. Which one has a shirt on? The fact that there is one woman in this group, the fact that there is one person of color. And then as we keep looking at them and inviting our eyes to sort of move around the painting, you might wonder, what are they looking at? We mentioned the guy all the way off to the left. He's looking at us, but no one else is. One of the things that unifies this group, their physical placement close together, fairly close to us, moving toward us, as we can see from the placement of their feet on the road ahead, only one looking out of the frame, and the whole other group is looking up and off into the distance, which of course begs the question of the viewer of what are they looking at? And we might ask another question of with what mood or with what thoughts are they looking at whatever they are seeing? This guy is without doubt, he's my favorite part of this painting. And I'm realizing I took this photograph this morning, this detail with my phone. It is not doing the blue of his eyes justice. This guy, you have to come to the gallery to see it, I guess, but we're talking some Daniel Craig blue eyes, very sort of staring out at you. And one of the details I love about it, the artist's choice, is the way his camouflage helmet is tipped down over his eyes, so it makes the shadow and beneath that, the eyes are sort of burning out at you. This soldier all the way to the left on the composition is also a really great way to discuss with visitors, whether they are guests in the gallery, like with Art in Focus, with our undergraduates, to sort of get a sense of what people with different backgrounds will make of an unfamiliar object like this. So I said that it is very clear that we are looking at a group of American servicemen and women, which I'm going to go back for 1 second. Something that, depending on people's familiarity, they might be able to immediately guess that the gentleman with no shirt, that he is in the Navy. He's wearing a sailor's cap. If you've seen a sailor's cap before, you might be able to position him in that grouping. And I always make sure to mention, especially with students, like my grandfather was in the Navy during World War II. He always referred to jeans as dungarees, which you are of that generation. You probably are familiar with that term. Students don't wear jeans very much anymore. They're much more into leggings at this time. But I tell them, when I was in middle school, bell bottoms were all the rage. This was the 1990s. So the 60s had come back around. And of course, sometimes you roll them up. And he would very proudly inform me that the Navy had invented those bell bottoms because you rolled them up so you kept your hem dry when you were swabbing the deck. And I, of course, would look at him and say, "You never swabbed a deck in your life, but okay, all right." And lo and behold, this gentleman with the sailor's cap is wearing rolled up dungarees. So that always makes me smile when I see him. It's kind of easy to suggest that the guy in the center with the brown jacket is part of the Air Force. He has goggles on his head, he has ear protection. Some detail that I will point out to students is that, even the jacket, the leather jacket that he's wearing, we still have a phrase, we say someone's wearing a bomber jacket. That might be able to be connected. It is very rare that I encounter students who are familiar with the term WAC or WAVE, the Women's Auxiliary Corps from World War II. That is probably what the woman to the left of the Army guy, where he is part of. And then we come to this guy. You might be able to make out on his helmet, which is camouflage, that there is a symbol. And it's been very interesting with me. Everyone who comes through the gallery, I ask them if they recognize the symbol on the helmet. And some people call it out immediately. Our two participants in Art in Focus a little while ago, they couldn't immediately recognize it. It's a circle with an anchor behind it and a little eagle on top. And it's the symbol of the US Marine Corps. So we've had people come in, and if they have themselves served or they've had someone who's relative serving in the Marine Corps, they immediately see that symbol. They know instantly what it is. And then you have other people for whom they can't quite make it out. And I always say, the Marine Corps symbol is something I could recognize it if I saw it on a bumper sticker, but I would have a harder time drawing it myself if you asked me to draw it out of nowhere. And if we look at his pocket, you might also be able to make out the letters US, and then M is kind of hidden in the corner. If you can recognize that as an M and you can fill in the MC, all right, we have identified this guy as a member of the US Marine Corps. If we look back at that gentleman with the bomber jacket, this is another case where, again, of what you bring to a painting will, of course, condition in some respect what you are taking out of it. I have been very fascinated to notice over the past month or so that it's very uncommon for students to say that they recognize that yellow symbol on that patch. Like, they don't connect it to what immediately I read it as a bomb. And there's a lightning bolt in white, there's a bomb in yellow. And generally, like, that symbol has meant less to them. But even with me being able to identify it as a bomb, I don't have any particular connection to what that patch actually represents. But we very early in the show had a visitor who eagerly forwarded us a link to the insignia of the 370th Test Flying Squadron, as I believe their name, that is a very specific airman's patch that is being worn on that bomber jacket. And this, I threw in, I took this detail this morning as well. This is one of the soldiers who's coming up from the rear right of the painting. And it makes me laugh because I see the features of this guy's face and I think, like, that looks like Humphrey Bogart. Like, I think this painter working in 1958 was kind of filling in some features from a famous Hollywood face. Not everyone has agreed with me. You are welcome to disagree if you think that is not the case. Bringing us back to our broader view of this painting, on its surface, it looks very simple. It's a group of US servicemen and women. They are moving forward, standing together. They are looking off into the distance. One person is looking at us. And it might take a few moments for us to really look at what is around and behind them because the human figures are taking up so much of the space. But what's interesting to me is the choices that the artist has made in showing what is at their backs. If we look at the lower right, where we saw the Humphrey Bogart character is moving to join up behind this group, we see other soldiers behind him, and they seem to be coming from a artillery gun emplacement. We can see sandbags at the extreme right edge of the painting. And beyond that, the way not only the colors of yellow to orange are arranged, but when you see it in person, even the way the brushstrokes appear, that looks like flames sort of licking up into the sky. But as you follow it upwards, it turns into this very beautifully pearlescent grouping of purples and grays and pinks. And especially in person, we were agreeing in our small group of Art in Focus in person, it's very peaceful at the top of that painting in terms of the color scheme. And as it descends on the other side of this arched painting, we get again yellows, but they're not necessarily summoning up images of flame. They are, however, highlighting in the distance at the lower left a destroyed building, a downed plane, the fragments of a tree. So there's so much destruction behind them, but they are moving away from it. And as I asked a moment ago, if you think about the mood that this artist seems to be interested in creating, and when we've had class visits coming to the gallery, I've often just, round robin style asked students, like, what's the first word that comes to mind to capture this vibe that you see? And, some students have said, they said relieved or hopeful. Some of the unified as a very common word that has been brought up, but other students have said troubled or wary, because there is this sort of very subdued and controlled, maybe even melancholy. I believe it was Pat in the gallery referred to the sailor as having like a yearning look on his face. So there's this very interesting sense of what is the mood that the artist is trying to capture. And taking us back to where you'd be sitting if you were visiting the gallery with an undergraduate class, I'll ask them to look straight ahead and then just turn their heads to the left and look at the WWII painting that has, you might be able to make out the silhouette of Lady Liberty, has sort of a turquoise background behind the clouds. No matter how far away from it you're sitting, you can immediately get a mood of jubilation. It is just release, it's victory. And the title of that painting, indeed, from 1918 was The Victorious Allies. And then I asked them to look again at this painting, and it's very clear that we can't assign that same level of victory, of enthusiasm, of it's all over. That's not what the artist is doing. Like, they are unified, absolutely. Maybe they're relieved, but they are also seemingly prepared, maybe is a word for it, thinking about something else that is coming. The fact that they're all looking together at something in the distance that can't be the flag since the flag is behind them. It just suggests some level of preparedness, perhaps, that is not quite just fervent patriotism as a mood. And this is where we wonder, about the unanswered questions. For what purpose was this particular painting? What was the artist given as a brief when he was hired to paint this in 1958? I mentioned that this traveled to us under the sort of provisional title of Heroes of World War II. One of the things that struck me as I looked at the image is, okay, if this is World War II and there is a Black soldier with this group, and this is where I will usually ask a student group, were the US Armed Forces integrated in World War II? And the answer, of course, is no, they were not integrated until 1949 when Harry Truman signed an executive order to make it so. So then we ask, all right, if this is 1958 when it's painted, is it a look back at the past, sort of envisioning that level of unity that was not actually there in integrated units during the conflict itself? But then we also wondered, okay, well, maybe there are other things about this painting that we are not seeing, because just like those who don't have familiarity with the US Marine Corps symbol, we don't have the eyes to see it. So we took a photograph of this and we sent it to the curators at the US Army Museum, and they immediately responded with their immense expertise that, in fact, it's not a World War II picture per se, because the soldiers that we're seeing are wearing gear from several different eras. So in some ways, it makes perfect sense if we think about this as the product of a very active artist studio. I've invited folks to think about, even going back in time, someone like Vermeer or Rembrandt with you have a studio full of props. You're getting people in to do life studies, you're wrapping them up in whatever gear and helmets you may have, casting them as the Mars god of war. I'm sure something similar may have been operating for Robert Lynn Lambdin, using what bits of military equipment he might have access to or that he could acquire. And the result is kind of a a collage of different military gear from different eras. Again, not something that we could have immediately assigned meaning to, but since we are a teaching museum, this is always really helpful to point out to students that an important thing is to be able to identify what you don't know and identify who you might reach out to help you get to that next area of knowledge. That still doesn't tell us exactly what the painter had in mind or what he was told when he was hired to paint this particular composition, but it hints at something, or at least tells us this can't just be a painting about World War II. And given that the date is 1958, and we had a little discussion in the gallery since Pat and Joanne are a generation older than me, and they mentioned, what does it mean for students to have less of a grasp of the history of our country in the middle, after World War II? Because I've often asked students who come in, like, if the year is 1958, was the United States involved in a foreign conflict? And they're not always able to answer that we were involved in Korea. Some of them are thinking of Vietnam, but that's still a little bit to come. And at least in the small gallery conversation we just had, we actually had a really interesting conversation about 1968, 10 years on from this painting. Pat's husband is a graduate of Fairfield, and she was telling me that after the Kent State shootings, that happened in April, that the university closed. Students were sent home. They were given the grade they had at the time that the semester ended. Joanne said she was studying at the University of Bridgeport. Same thing. The university closed. They sent students home. So, and that's a period of history that I know certainly less about. And I said to them that it just reminds you that viewing art in a group, especially when you mix different ages, different backgrounds, different levels of engagement or areas of expertise, you just get something that is really magical. Seems a cheesy word, but you get something new. You get something that you might not have expected. So that has been a true pleasure with so many works from the show, but particularly this Robert Lynn Lambdin. As I said, we still have so many unanswered questions about. And the last thing I'll say, and of course, if anyone has any comments or their own thoughts on this painting, they're welcome to share them here in the chat. They're welcome to send them to me at the museum. It comes back for me to this Marine all the way to the left side of this painting, the only person who is looking outward at us. And since I also often invite people to consider, how would this painting be different if one factor is changed? If all of these servicemen and women were looking at us, I think it would be too much. If none of them were looking at us, that might make us feel that we're not, we're witnessing, but we're not really part of this. The way the artist structured this as the road leading directly to us, one soldier staring right at us, and I don't think it's by chance that he is the one supporting the injured soldier. He is making direct eye contact as if to say, like, you are implicated in everything that we have experienced, everything that is behind us, everything that's coming. Like, this is part of a story that you are a part of, not merely an outside passive watcher. So I think it's just such a simple but powerful choice that makes a huge difference. And as I said, the photographs do not do his eyes justice. And something too, I mentioned a student had raised this, I'll see if I can find my detail of not Humphrey Bogart, but the gentleman. There was a student a couple of weeks ago who pointed out that the Marine seems older than the other men and women in the painting. And just suggesting, like, could it be that he has this stare because he's been through it before? Could he be one of those who was in World War II after having already served in World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, as it was once thought? I mean, I don't think we have necessarily answers to those questions, but it is interesting to notice again a difference. There are certainly very fresh-faced young men and women here, and then there is a slightly more mature individual, and that is the one who's carrying the wounded veteran who is making eye contact with us. So as with so much art, it allows you to take many threads away from it, depending on where you are in time and in your own experience as you look at it. If you are in the area of Fairfield, Connecticut and able to come see this extraordinary exhibition, it is on view through July of 2026. As you probably know, everything we do is free and open to the public. So we hope that you will be able to stop by in person. And if not, we will look forward to seeing you at the next virtual Art in Focus. Have a nice day, everyone.